Hey everybody, can you hear me okay? Yay, fantastic. Well, hello and welcome everyone to part 5 of our Meaningful Change series, sponsored by our lead sponsor, Praxis Precision Medicines and Neurocrine Biosciences. My name is Casey Craig. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Stella's mom. She's a 5.5-year-old SCN8A warrior that's sweet, sassy, and fiercely strong, just like all of your kiddos. I'm so excited to be here today as the Acute Syndrome Foundation moderator as we start to come to a close of the Meaningful Change series. Today's topic is one that I believe we can all relate to: the ins and outs of SCN8A and feeding tubes. Whether your child has a feeding tube already or you are exploring it as a future option for your kiddo, this discussion is for you. We have Tracy Nagy from the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation and SCN8A parents Katie, Lindsay, Dianelli to discuss various uses of feeding tubes and to answer your questions that were posted in our SCN8A Family Support Group page. All right, so before we get started, just a reminder, group interaction through questions and or comments will take place in the chat box. The chat box to your right allows you to type questions and or responses for any of our guests today. To your left, there's a tab titled Expo, and in this area, you will find some troubleshooting if you're experiencing technical issues, or you may also type a request for help in the chat box. Our technical guru, Megan Varner, will help you tackle any technical issues you may have today. Just a friendly reminder to mark your calendars for next week as we wrap up our Meaningful Change series with our last event, a conversation between Praxis and the SCN8A community. Praxis Precision Medicines will be there to provide us with updates, and we will have a Q&A on their SCN8A program. It should be a very informative event, and I look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday. Now I would like to introduce to you our very own Hilary Savoie. As you are probably aware, she is the founder and director of the Acute Syndrome Foundation and is a fellow to-be mommy to Esme. Although Esme is primarily fed by her feeding tube, she loves to cook and bake with her mommy. Now to introduce our head chef and baker, Hilary Savoie.
Hi, Casey.
Hello.
Hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you, as always, for the intro.
Absolutely.
A little sad. We've got only one more of these left for the spring.
I know. It's always been fun. At least we get to see each other once a week, right?
Exactly. All right. Well, thank you so much, Casey.
You're welcome. See ya.
All right, everyone. So we are back for our Meaningful Change series. And just as Casey said, this series focuses on the ways in which the knowledge found within our SCN8A community can be leveraged to better support all of our children. We are an active community with a history of engaging deeply, meaningfully, and measurably among ourselves, as well as with the medical, research, and drug development communities. And we want to dig deeper into sharing the benefits of those experiences. This week marks the end of our sponsored portion of the Meaningful Change series. But don't forget, again, as Casey said, we have our second meeting with Praxis Precision Medicines, same time next week, to engage around some Q&A on their 8A program. And follow up from our first meeting last month. Sorry, lots and lots of water today. Okay, so we're gonna start talking about feeding tubes. On a personal note, tomorrow marks the decade anniversary of the event that led to Esme needing a feeding tube. For her, it was repeated aspiration of food, and that was due to her low tone, to reflux, to failure to thrive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. She was 3 months old at the time, and I really resisted the idea of the tube at first, and I insisted that it would only be temporary. But pretty soon after, I grew really grateful for it and proud of it, and acutely aware that placing Esme's feeding tube was the single best parenting decision that I have ever made. And even if tomorrow she were going to magically eat everything by mouth, which she's not going to, I'd leave the tube because it is, allows for midnight meds and hydration when she's sick, and supplemental nutrition if she were eating by mouth but sometimes needed a little extra help. So I love her tube. I'm so proud of it. And I often worry that people wait too long to place them. We certainly did. Nearly half of our SCN8A population uses feeding tubes, but we don't all use them the same way or for the same reasons. And so today we've invited our speakers, and you guys, if you can hear me, you can go ahead and start popping on the screen. We've invited speakers today who have very different feeding tube experiences to talk about their experiences and help us dig in a little bit. So there's Tracy. Hi, Tracy. Thanks for joining.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And I know we've got a few more people popping on, but I guess we can. Here comes Lindsay. Hi, Lindsay.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining. And I think we have 2 more parents joining, but we can, sometimes it takes a little bit, so we can start to just do brief introductions. Tracy, I'm really excited to have you on. As I was saying in the green room ahead of this, I have known Tracy for ages, really literally since Esme had her feeding tube placed, I think was our first contact. And my first experience in the nonprofit world, special needs nonprofit world, was as Tracy's volunteer at the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation. So Tracy, do you want to just take a moment and introduce yourself and the foundation and what you do?
Sure. So my son is nearly 13. I know, right? And he got his first feeding tube at 2 months old, and that was probably too late. But he's got Coulin-de-Vries syndrome, and when he first got his feeding tube, we had no idea what he had. We didn't get to genetic testing until he was about 20 months old. So that's when we got his diagnosis. And in that time, he had gone from NG tube to G tube to GJ tube. And we had already experienced, pretty much everything there was with tube feeding. And so what really struck me about tube feeding was how different it was than any other, any other support that a child might need. In terms of, you don't question whether or not a child needs oxygen. You don't question whether or not a child needs, his SMOs or his, wheelchair or whatever it is that the child needs help doing, except eating. Eating, for some reason, you're pretty resistant to saying that a child needs help eating because everyone assumes that eating is just innate. Child eats. What's going to prevent them from eating? And that was what struck me as being so different about it. And no one ever in our lives questioned whether or not he needed glasses or any of the other things that I mentioned that he needed, and except tube feeding. And I really set out to change how people approach tube feeding. When I first started, there was nothing out there. It was, this is almost 13 years ago. So there was very little about pediatric tube feeding that wasn't written by medical professionals. There was nothing about it in the home. And, my background is market research and strategic communications and branding. And I wanted to change the perception of tube feeding, but also give people all the resources that they needed to do this at home. So, and the real rationale is that it is scary for parents, and it doesn't have to be if you have other people to ask questions to, if you have other resources. And also, if there's positive messaging out there, then your friends and family don't think that this is the end of the world and can be supportive of you when you make this decision, because, it is a tough decision. I mean, my son would not be alive without it. And so for me, it felt once it became a doctor raised the issue, we immediately said yes. And I think it took my husband a little bit longer to get on board with that, but I was like, thank God there's something out there that can help him, because he was struggling. He struggled to eat from the day he was born. And so, that was the rationale behind it. And at the end of the day, we're a group of parents with experience. And so we're able to tell people what it's really like because we live it day in and day out.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting, and we can dig a bit more into this, Tracy, as we talk. But I think that what is so wonderful about what you're doing at the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation is really twofold. And what makes it so special is, that it's peer-to-peer, parents at any hour I remember being in the hospital and typing a question, at 2 a.m. and getting an answer, and how wonderful that is. And then also, as you said, the really positive messaging. And that's something we've tried to do at the Cute Syndrome as well, is like, life has a lot of negatives, and there, why not also highlight some of those positives? So thank you so much for joining today. And Lindsay, do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself just a little bit and talk about, I think what's so interesting, and the reason I asked you on was to talk about Mackenzie's sort of intermittent use of an NG tube and how that's served.
So my name's Lindsay Ulyash. I am Mackenzie's mom. Mackenzie is 3 years old. She actually has a G tube now. Yeah, we got it in September this past of 2020. It was about, I guess, February of 19. She completely stopped eating. And her neurologist was like, you need to be admitted immediately. She needs an NG. So we supplemented with Keto V formula because we call her a roller coaster because she eats, she doesn't eat. She eats, she doesn't eat. She goes 2 months without eating, and then she'll go 3 months with eating everything. So back in February, we ended up being admitted for 8 days. She wasn't tolerating the pump. We were trying to figure out what our next option was. And then we kind of got on this of just pushing everything through the syringe. And then I was like, she went, and then she had a few seizures and she ended up eating again. And then from there, I got a lot of testing done. She got a colonoscopy. She had stool samples done because I wanted to make sure that there was nothing wrong with her. Like our GI brought it up multiple times. Maybe she needs to get a tube. Maybe she needs a tube. And I was very hesitant. I was like, no. Something, I want to figure out why. Why isn't she eating? If there's nothing wrong with her and this is just her, then I'll accept it. But I needed to know for my own self that nothing was medically wrong with her first. So she did get a colonoscopy. That did not go over well. She started bleeding internally. It ended up being a bigger thing than it should have from the biopsies that they took. And then once that came back, everything came back normal. My husband and I both decided that it was time. She needed this. So she did end up, because we were putting the NG in, we were taking it out when she was eating. Now we would push it to the very, very end, or she wouldn't drink enough. So now we did end up getting a G tube. And like you said, Hillary, it was probably the best decision we've ever made. She has a lot of granulation tissue that did develop, and she had to get it cauterized. So that was a big, big struggle. My husband, I know he's not going to want me to say this, but he had a very hard time with taking her because she was just screaming. She has to go back tomorrow for another cauterization, and I have to take her because he just can't stomach it. It's going to be hard, but I'm hoping that once it's over, and we don't have to go get it done again.
I have some troubleshooting things that I can help you with there.
Yeah.
Silver nitrate, which is the cauterization thing.
Yes.
If you don't want to do that, I have an alternative that works really well at home.
Okay.
Very well.
I am open to it. So please share.
Yes. Granulation.
Granulation. We have the stoma. We use the stoma powder.
That's completely different.
Okay.
Granulation it was developed by a surgical nurse.
Okay.
And it's just a cream. It's more effective than the steroid cream.
Okay.
Triamcinolone, acetonide, or whatever that other do, that you usually do first before the silver nitrate. My son had reactions to silver nitrate that actually made the granulation tissue worse. So it would grow back bigger and stronger.
Okay.
So because what you're doing, the granulation tissue is actually a natural part of the healing process. So it's your body trying to heal itself after.
Right.
But the granulation actually it's very it's a lot kinder than the silver nitrate.
Okay. Thank you.
And actually to that end, and this is what's I think is so great about like this topic is feeding tubes are so, it's so weird because there's just a few sort of repeating issues that come up and a few assumptions that happen, right? So first, Lindsay, this is like, it's such a perfect example, right? That I think we all think about feeding tubes as like, okay, there's this event that makes it really clear that you need a feeding tube and it's done, right? Whereas I think the majority of kids don't have an event like Esme had, where it's this big dramatic thing. It's this slow seep, right? You use an NG tube, you don't, you worry, you wonder, you test, and then you finally say like, it feels like you're giving up. And then lo and behold, it's actually a whole heck of a lot easier than inserting an NG tube over and over and over again. But to the end of the granulation tissue, Esme also had terrible granulation tissue. She also immediately grew it back after the silver nitrate. And what worked for her was cloth feeding tube pads. So we bought those, and it took a little while, but she has like, her site is so beautiful that doctors remark on it all the time. They're like, that's the nicest site I've ever seen. And it's really just those cloth pads because they wick away. And I think a lot of what we do on those sites winds up holding the moisture there. Mm-hmm. So also worth trying if you don't have, do you have them?
No, yeah, we do use them because she still has, the doctor told us, well, when she went to get the silver nitrate, when she got it done the first time, they actually told us that we waited too long because it was so big, because we waited too long because we were trying other things from her GI that I just don't think she was well versed in. And that just gave me another thought of we need to switch GI doctors because of this now. But my husband just told me that he already ordered the granulation. So tomorrow's appointment will be canceled and we will be trying that instead. If I can avoid putting her through something like that again, I 100% will. So thank you for that, Tracy.
No problem. And this is, I think, a really big thing about hearing from other parents. It's just like, it took me 6 months to find another parent who was tube feeding, and I had recreated a wheel. And I just, we have all this kind of troubleshooting information and all these different things that you can, someone's experienced it before, guaranteed. Someone's lived it, and there's always an answer out there. And if I don't know it, or no one on FTA knows it, there's other parents, and we've got 60,000 of them that we can ask. So.
Same also, Lindsay, with the pump. Esme had it. It's a rare thing. Usually when kids have feeding intolerance, parents are told to slow down the pump. Pump feed, slow it down. With Esme, the more we slowed it down, the more likely she was to vomit. Mm-hmm. And so we push fast. Like when they see us do it in the hospital, they're horrified. But that's the best way is we push 2 ounces, like, yep. And then leave her alone for 10 minutes. And that's what she responds really well to.
We actually, we don't even give her Keto V anymore because she's on the ketogenic diet. And it just wasn't sitting. I just didn't think it was sitting right in her stomach overall, just that piece that we started blending all of her food, and we put that just through her tube when she chooses not to eat, because everything obviously is measured out, and I just put it in my baby bullet and blend it up, and off we go. And I can feed her in 20 minutes or 15 minutes really, and when she doesn't want to eat. So
amazing. Well, I see Katie has jumped on, so why don't we bring you into the mix? I know Dee is still having some trouble with audio and video, and it would not be a meaningful change meeting if we did not have some kind of technical difficulty. So,
I think you guys can hear me though, right?
oh, perfect. Yes, we
Okay, so
can.
you can't see my beautiful face, but.
Oh, shoot. Well,
So
we
at least you
can,
can hear me, that's all that matters.
and we can see the picture of you and Max. So that's
Yeah, there you go. You get Max's beautiful face.
good. Okay, so actually, yeah, Katie, do you want to talk to us a little bit about Wyatt and his feeding tube use and all of that good stuff?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. Okay. So Wyatt, I think, is a lot like Mackenzie. Lindsay, how you were describing her like a roller coaster. He was 5 when he got his G-tube, and we spent a year with him going on what we called feeding strikes, where he just wouldn't. We would do whatever we could to get him to eat, and when we would tell people he wasn't eating, they would be like, oh yeah, my kid doesn't do that too. I'm like, no, literally, he just doesn't actually eat. We have to supplement with like Carnation Instant Breakfast or, Pediasure or something nutritional. He's literally not eating. So eventually, after about a year of that, we had also stalled with the keto diet, and it just made sense to make that the next step because he was not responding to eating keto, but we needed to take that next step to see if it would help with seizure control. And he wasn't eating food anyways. But that was a really difficult decision. I know I talked to Hillary about that and several others in the community. I feel like for a lot of us, we kind of feel like we're failing in some way, and it just is not what we wanted for our kids. And so it took us a little bit to get to that place, but man, I don't know why we drug our feet. It was really the best decision we could have made for him. And it's not been an easy road. He's had it for almost 4 years now. But it is only because our kiddo is so strong-willed and he is so stubborn, and he's got his own little quirky behaviors, and in his little world, his G-tube is probably one of the only things he can control, and that includes ripping it out, and not having it. So we went through a nice little phase where he was ripping it out multiple times a day, where we were having to try to troubleshoot, trying to keep it in. He figured out he could rip it out and then he could bite the balloon to break it. He's really crafty. Yeah. So you can't even be mad at him. He's so dang cute though. So, we ended up talking with his whole G-tube team, whether it was, the surgical team or the GI specialist. And it really kind of felt like nobody had been in our position before, because they just kind of nodded their head and smiled like we were crazy, or like he was just the strangest child ever for not wanting his G-tube in. And it was kind of perplexing as a parent. I'm like, we can't be the only one whose kid just rips his G-tube out, who doesn't want it in for whatever reason. He can't tell us, he's nonverbal, but it doesn't hurt him. He's perfectly fine. It's just a behavior. So we ended up with a non-balloon button, and that works fantastic. But he does also get that one out every so often. We just moved to Florida 2 weeks ago, and we're establishing care, and he got his new one that's supposed to last 6 months. He just got that one out. It was in there for about 3 weeks. So, but we have lots of backups. It's more like a game for him, but it's amazing when he's not feeling good. We don't have to worry about taking him to the hospital. We don't have to worry about whether or not he's going to get dehydrated. He has constipation issues. So we can just flush fluids. We can flush Miralax. We can flush Senna. We can do whatever we need to do to, make him feel better. We do his meds twice a day. With his G-tube. I can imagine having to do that by mouth with some of the behavior issues that we deal with as well. It was hard enough having to try to kind of hold him down to push through his G-tube. I can't imagine trying to do that through his mouth. And it's so dealing with all of the parts and pieces that go along with that, it can be a bit much, but honestly, having his G-tube is one of the better decisions that we've made as far as his medical care. So I wish we would have done it a little bit sooner and not been as scared as we were. So I'm really glad that you guys are having this discussion for any parents that might be on the fence or that might be a little intimidated, because that's really what it was for us, was the intimidation and that kind of feeling of somehow. So.
And I think it's such a common feeling, the idea that you're somehow letting your kid down, and then the relief that comes with realizing that you're in fact doing the exact opposite. And I think Tracy, I don't know if you were having the same thought as Katie was talking about this, but there's someone at Feeding Tube Awareness, and I was thinking about her talking about her daughter who would pull out her tube, and that when her windows were open at her house, her neighbors could hear her say, "Take your finger out of your stomach."
Yes.
Which is only to be heard in a tube feeding house.
The things that you hear, the things you say, I mean, it's just, but one of the other things that I completely related to is that, the wishing you'd done it sooner, I think is a common, and wishing you had gone from a different tube. So I regret not doing the G tube sooner from the NG, and I regret not doing the GJ sooner from the G. So I think that these are, hindsight's 2020. I don't know if we can say that anymore after last year, but it's really, I think it is good to know that it feels like the best decision. And it's the sense of relief. I mean, you're scared as hell, but you're also so relieved that there's another way to do this. I mean, it's just another way to get the things that the kid needs inside. Like, it comes down to, it's like, I'm not going to stress about how it gets in anymore. It's just, it makes it so much easier to get the meds in. It makes it so much easier to get fluids in, and you're able to manage things, especially when they're sick. Like, managing things, it makes it so much easier just to manage that the day to day. And it can change day to day. I mean, some days they will eat, and some days they won't. And some days they'll drink, and some days they won't. So it just levels the playing field a little bit.
Absolutely. And I personally forget that every kid doesn't come with one. Like when I'm talking to my neurotypical parenting friends, and they're like, "Do I wake them up? They have a fever. Do I wake them up to give them Tylenol in the middle of the night?" I'm like, put it in the tube. Apparently they don't all come with one. So and
it's not
to that
standard
end,
issue.
It's not standard issue. It's so weird. It should be. And to that end, I think Dee, I know we don't have you on video, but I'd like to invite you on to talk a little bit about Max. And I think he's sort of represents a different case here. And if you want to talk a little bit about what caused you to get to the tube, and also the transition from G to GJ.
Sure. So in Max's case, he's had the G tube since he was about shy of 6 months old. And so we were brand new to all this. We hadn't even known yet about SCN8A. Actually, it was one of those situations where he was throwing up his milk and we didn't know why. He started with a fever. We rushed him to our urgent care. And when they saw the kind of case they had, they're like, nope, straight to the main hospital. We went, remember being admitted. Remember being told the next day, your son is aspirating liquids and that's why he's vomiting. And at the same time, that's when we found out about the mutation. So it was a lot to take in. At that time, he was still able to swallow solids. Okay, so, I made a deal with the team that, okay, we'll get this scary G tube in. It took me a few days of convincing because I'm like, no, I'll just feed him. I'll figure it out. I'll feed him the solids. We'll try to throw in liquids in there. I'll figure it out. But then after, talking with the speech therapist and the doctors, we went forward with putting in the tube. And like you guys said, after it was in and I realized the ease I could give him medicines and nutrition, I was like, why was I fighting this? I don't have to wake him up to give him his medicines that he needs anymore. He can sleep, because obviously waking him up can cause seizures and all that stuff. So I remember that, and we were able to keep with the G-tube for about 4 or 5 more years. Funny enough, when we finally, for a little while, got seizure control, we were starting to have issues with GI. He was vomiting a lot. I don't know if it had to do with the meds or if it had to do with his reflux just getting out of hand for whatever reason, just because of the nature of his condition. But finally, the nail in the coffin, despite my best efforts, was when he aspirated on his vomit. And we almost lost him. And then that's when the doctors came in, like, look, his, for whatever reason, this is happening, and we want to do the GJ tube, which again, I was fighting, right? I was like, no, this is such a step backwards. We were doing so well. He has seizure control. We could get this under control. And, finally with my husband made the decision, like, okay, let's, we got to try this because we can't keep the medicines down. We can't keep the feeds down. He's lost a lot of weight over the last few months. What I would say about the GJ tube is make sure they put in a long enough tube in, because the first one they put in, I feel bad that I don't have a video, but basically it was just shy of entering the jejunum. So what happened in the hospital, that of course no one believed me, is that it easily rolled back into his stomach and he continued vomiting. To the point where even the doctor's like, oh, that's not formula. There's no possible way that the J is outside of the jejunum. Lo and behold, it was. But that's our forever fight with some doctors. And then they decided to put in a longer one, and we've been fine since. And it goes back to, wow, why didn't I do this sooner? Max, as you can see in the picture, he was a lot thinner. Within a year, he actually gained over 20 pounds. So we went a little too far with his weight gain on that count. But, in the end of it, when I look back, knowing that even if he's sick and vomiting, we can still get the meds in. So no matter what, like, he could be sick or he could be vomiting for whatever reason, and I have the confidence in knowing that I can give him the medications that he needs, because he gets them throughout the day. He's on right now like 4 or 5 seizure meds and all the other meds to combat the side effects of those seizure meds, as you all are aware. But I could get him fluids, which is a huge thing. And the one thing I was fearful of was the idea that he had to go back to formula. And there are still, unfortunately, some doctors out there that would say, no, they have to stay on formula if they get the J-tube. And that is absolutely, positively wrong. And of course, I found this, it was one of those situations where I learned it from one of the parents in the group, like, no, yep, we're doing this for our daughter. You could totally give Max food. And I go back to the gym, like, and I had like this whole essay written for her to convince her for us to get on the food. And it was like, yeah, sure, no problem. I'll send the script in. I'm like, what the, expletive. Like, seriously, my issue with this, and you did not tell me that Max could be on. Anyway, so I don't care who the person is, your child can definitely eat food. It could be food that you blenderize. You just got to be mindful to make sure that there's no little bits of pieces of food in there because it will get stuck, and then that's a rush to the hospital. That's not something you could easily change out yourself. Or you go with one. I mean, there's so many companies out there now doing blenderized food. There's so many options now. I remember a time where I had to share information with the nutritionists, with the doctors about the benefits of food. And now they have it on the ready as part of, like, if you're inpatient, you can choose to either, it's just part of the plan. They have food now, and it's such a beautiful, like, to me, out of all the transitions that's happened in the medical community, that to me is one of the most beautiful ones that has started to happen. The realization that human beings are not meant to live off of formula for the rest of their lives. We should be able to give our kids food, and we can. And I think that was the one thing that had me the most fearful, was that I couldn't give my son food. Like, and I know it sounds silly out of, the grand scheme of things. But I wanted that assurance, and now knowing that I could, it's just, I don't see us going back to just a regular G-tube as much as I feel like that would be a step forward. It's almost like, oh man, but if he's sick, like, this is another way I don't have to send him to the hospital, because I can manage his feeds, I can manage his fluids. This is just, if anything, is a step forward, because it's another opportunity to remain home and not be in a hospital setting, because you can manage that kind of care with them. And the one downside to the GJ tube is that it's not something you can change by yourself. We have to make sure we're on the schedule of radiology every 3 months to change it out. But I will say the process is painless. They've allowed me to be in the room when they're changing out the GJ tube, and Max always handles it like a champ. I've never seen any issues with that. But that being said, that's what I got. Again, I'm always going to be sad when there's something more that Max needs to help him. But I try to remind myself that, this is, we're just doing what we can to help get him stronger and back to a good rhythm, with his therapies and different things, so that he's not going backwards on his quality of life. And on another note, I know you can work on increasing the rate of feeds. So that was my other concern. It's like, oh my God, he's going to be attached to a tube all the time. So actually I got it to where right now he's only getting 2 feeds at night. And I'm still able to give him food in his stomach, because I also learned he needs something in his stomach for some of the meds that have to go through the stomach. So he's still getting that. I give him food 3 times a day. I give him like smoothies. It's not anything out of this world, but at least he's still getting something in his stomach, and he's doing really well. We haven't had any issues, knock on wood, with vomiting since switching to the DJ.
Thank you, Dee. And I think you highlighted so many important pieces here, right? Like knowing your child, knowing what they need, advocating for the things, that the doctors don't always know quite what to do with us. And sometimes we know more than they do about what the options are, because we're having these kinds of conversations. So I think that's so important. And Tracy, you mentioned in the chat here that an option for long-term GJ use is to get a separate J tube. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it was on the table for my son, and then we were able to transition back to G feeds, continuous G feeds, but G feeds. And because we had a different kind of experience with the GJ placement, which was challenging. Probably because I wasn't going to a children's hospital, and I was at an offshoot of a children's hospital, and so the radiology team just wasn't as familiar, and so I wasn't allowed to be in the room. He was an infant, everything else, and so those tube changes were hard. Plus, our hospital did it with sedation, so he was sedated every 2.5 to 3 months, on top of sedation for other things he was getting sedated for testing and whatnot. So you can get, if your hospital is not using sedation and it's just a change, then there's really no reason you can keep using the GJ. If your hospital is using sedation and that is a concern that you have over time, then a separate J tube is an option. So what they do is it's just like having a G tube, except this one goes right to the intestines. And so you still have the functionality of having both the G and the J access. It just makes it easier in the sense that you can change a J tube at home because they're button style, the same as a G tube. J stomas are a little bit more finicky. Sometimes they're a little leaky, and so there's definitely pros and cons if you weigh this decision. But I just wanted to throw it out there as an option.
Yeah, and I think that it's so important to talk about the fact that there are lots and lots of options, because I think what happens is that and I think we have this experience in rare disease in all kinds of different ways, right? Like your neurologist has seen maybe no SCN8A cases and they have SCN1A and they get confused. It's sort of a similar thing. I think if they've seen one kid that did one thing one time, and that's kind of what they stick with, unless it's a large institution. And even then, still, you might have resistance. And so I think just understanding that, as we were saying earlier, all of the kids are different, and yet even very different kids can provide information to us that helps us with our child, as far as just understanding that there's a lot of options out there. I do want to invite parents who are watching to ask questions, jump in if you have feedback, other things to add, because
Hillary,
we've got,
if you don't mind, there's one more thing I wanted to mention.
Of course.
So I know you guys were talking about like the site and having to use the silver nitrate and things like that. I do recall like the first few months to a year that Max had the G tube, we were dealing with that. The moment we got the G tube covers, those cute little ones that they sell on Etsy or different places, we've never had an issue again. I can't tell you his site. I mean, we are constantly getting complimented on how clean and good his site is. Like, wow, we've never seen a site this good for so long. Like, there's always issues. I don't know what it is, about it. I'm assuming it's the fabric and the way it absorbs the liquids that can come out. But that has been a lifesaver the moment we started using that. And we change it 1 to 2 times a day, just depending on the day's event. And we have like a bunch stored away. But I will say, if you are having those issues, I would try that, because that we didn't have to use anything. We didn't have to use any silver nitrate, no creams, no nothing. Just during bath time, just making sure we clean the site, and that's it, with soap and water, and then we put a G tube on. And hopefully that helps some of you.
Yeah, I was saying, I think Dee, you might have popped off. We had a very similar experience. If you have tried them and they haven't worked, I know, Lindsay, you mentioned that you have some. The thing that I found is that there were certain types, at least for Esme, that were really problematic. So I always get the ones that are fleece backed, and I never get them if they've been serge stitched. This sounds really picky, but it's actually, for her, it was important. If they're serge stitched on the, so they're circular shape and then there's the cutout, if that's serge stitched, it was holding gunk in there and creating friction. So I always make sure that they're folded there, not serge stitched. They can be on the outside, and that they're always a snap and not a Velcro, because the Velcro was also creating some irritation. And it was trial and error for her, but really the absorbent ones I think were really important. And pretty much everyone that I know gets, when they get a 2, they get a delivery of those, because they're so helpful.
There's a million makers. It seems like every mom with a sewing machine makes these things. So look around. I mean, we've got, I don't know how many listed on our website, and I know that's not nearly as much. There's fleece backed, and there's flannel backed, and bamboo backed, and so you can find lots of different types and different thicknesses, different widths. So you just, whatever really does work for your child. Again, it's like everything else, trial and error.
So I want to hit a couple of questions that we were asked in the group, unless anyone has questions in the Oh, so Gail, actually, sorry, Gail, I'm just seeing G-tube covers. Is there a brand that's better? So, you know, as Tracy said, I think it's really trial and error, but sometimes I think if they are too thick, they can be problematic. So my recommendation would be to try a couple from a couple different makers and see if you have a shorter peg on your tube and then the pad is thick, it can kind of pull up and cause some discomfort. But I would try a couple of different varieties and just make sure that they're moisture wicking and not just like cute, because I have a few of those and I never use those. So we had a few questions in the support group. I think we covered actually quite a few of them, but pumps for blended diets. So we talked about J-tube blended diets, and that's presumably presented by pump, right, Dee?
Yes. So I've actually tried both the kangaroo and I forget what the other one's called, the one that's more greenish and flat. And kangaroo for me worked best for the food blends. I was having, yeah, I know, right? I've heard different things from other people. But for whatever reason, the foods were getting more stuck on the other one than the kangaroo. Maybe it was just the way I was making the food at the time of that. I don't know. I also personally stay with the kangaroo because that's what the hospital has, the hospital that we go to. So it makes it easy if like I have to transition when we enter the hospital or if there's ever an issue. And that where I'm at the hospital as an outpatient, I could like run to the friends that I have an inpatient, like, hey, can I have a bag or something? Or, hey, my battery ran out. Do you have a charger or whatever? So that's like the two reasons why I stay with the kangaroo, and it's worked great with the food feedings.
Tracy, did you have something to add to that?
I bet when you were using the infinity pump, you weren't modifying the bag. The infinity probably the one that I would say most people use for blended foods because you can modify the bag. And then you don't get the alarms with the thicker foods or even, thicker anything, food formulas or, the pre-made blended foods. There's also a Kangaroo Connect pump, which I don't know if that's the one you have. It's a smaller one. It's not the Kangaroo Joey. The Joey is the big. If the Kangaroo Connect pump was actually designed to handle thicker foods.
I'll ask the doctor about that. Because
yeah,
that's what we're doing is like, so we're doing Nourish for the J feeding. And then I do my smoothies, which includes oatmeal, banana juice, and some coconut milk, something simple.
And if you use a commercial blender, you can pretty much blend anything.
Yeah, we have a BlendTech, which by the way, if you don't know this, BlendTech actually has a nice discount option for the medical community, where I think they only charge you $100 for the BlendTech.
Yeah, there's the medical discounts. I think there's also one for the Vitamix, I believe, as well.
Has one as well, yeah. Gail is asking Tracy, how you modify the bag.
I will post the video in the chat because I don't have a bag near me, but it was super easy to do. And and also what it does is it can also make the infinity bag a gravity bag, helpful in power outages if you ever need it. It's just a backup to do. But I'll post the video. It's super easy.
Okay, and then we'll also share that in the support group as well. So Gail is saying they use the infinity bags with feral bags as well. Okay, so I think this is also really good, just a good reminder point to say, if you have these questions, if you're coming up against these questions, you should ask in our support group. There's probably someone who can answer, or go to the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation Facebook page, where there are literally 60,000 people who are ready, willing, and able to answer questions as well. Oh, and then Tracy just shared that YouTube video.
I would say even the Facebook page, the only thing now is the way that Facebook is. You have to set a page if you're asking a question, because the way that they have changed pages has made it very difficult. But our website has got so much information and that's searchable that you can often find, like those late night questions that you have, you can often find the answers there too.
Yeah. Do you still have the guide?
Oh yeah, the
new
parent
student
guide.
that
The parent guide. Hillary helped write the parent guide. Yeah, the parent guide has been. It's being distributed in a lot of hospitals now, and it's basically everything we wished we knew when we first started tube feeding. It was, and you know, one of the things I want to do say about all the resources that we do have, they're medically reviewed. So we've had, you know, doctors and nurses review these things. They're just written in lay terms and they're written by parents so that, you know, everything is correct information. It's just easier to understand.
and informed. I think, again, when you're looking at such a broad group of people, you're gathering so much information. You know, you at the Feeding Tube Awareness Foundation have access to such a broad group that you can be funneling all of that information through, as opposed to a physician that, you know, still will see a lot of kids, but not that many, not 60,000. So to that end, I think we don't have any more questions popping up, and I think we covered all of the questions from the support group. So I just wanted to ask each of you, we've got a few more minutes left, to just, now that we've talked this through a little bit, like last words, tips, advice, things you didn't get a chance to say. Katie, want to put you on the spot?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
You know, I would just say go with your gut and really trial and error is your friend when it comes to tube feeding. And something that I had no idea about until we absolutely needed it. And I wish that I don't have his diaper bag with me right now because he's not with me. But with the bolus syringes, when you open up a bolus syringe package, there's a little tiny blue tip in there. If you put the blue tip on the bolus syringe, you can push it straight through the G tube. You don't need an attachment, which was huge. For some reason, I don't even know why, because Wyatt is Wyatt. He decided that he had this aversion to extension tubes. And so he stopped letting us feed him with the extension tubes. And that was hugely problematic, right? So we couldn't feed him with his G tube for months. We just had to try to feed him orally with just liquids until COVID hit and he got really, really sick, and we were doing everything we could do to avoid the hospital. And the doctor was like, I think it's time. And we were like, no, really don't want to go. And we made a last, and I happened to just kind of have this moment where it clicked. And I was like, what are these blue things? I have no idea. I always just throw them away. And so I stuck it on and I was like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing thing ever. And so that's how we started feeding him, was just like 5 bolus syringes, one after another. And it's been so helpful because you don't need the extension tube. So just for like quick hydration or whatever, I really wish I would have known that sooner. So I don't know if maybe that's helpful to somebody else.
That's incredibly helpful. And actually, Mackenzie Wardrop wanted me to mention that they do the same with the slip tip syringes for meds. They go just straight into the G tube and push through that way, so that they're not losing meds in the extension set. And Casey says there's also 2-inch extension sets for that. Amazing. See, and I think this is the funny thing about this is, like, I actually just talked to another parent who walked me through her process for giving meds, and I have literally never seen in 10 years another person do meds that way, and it blew my mind. I'm not going to change the way I do it, but I think it's so important that we know that there are alternatives, because each kid is going to need something different potentially. Lindsay, do you have any last words you want to share?
Sure. Just like Katie said, like we've been saying, go with what you think works. And I mean, it was honestly the best decision that we have made, getting Mackenzie's G-tube, because we did fight for a very long time with an NG. She has a 1-year-old sister that when she was starting to move, she was trying to pull it out. It just became too much of a hassle. I mean, my 1-year-old now tries to put her extension on Mackenzie's tube for me to help me feed her. But you just really need to, as a parent, you got to do what's right. I mean, it's a very hard decision, but use the resources that Tracy's given us, like that were on the SCN8A page. Like, we're here to help. If you're kind of on the fence and whatever you need, I mean, we're here. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. And it's one of the great things in this community. We are always ready, willing, and able to answer each other's questions. You know, I think we're all eager to share what we've learned. Dee, do you have any last thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, just a reminder to everyone that's on here, especially the women that are on the screen, you're doing a good job. Whatever decision you make, you're making it with the idea that you know, with love for your child. So even if in those moments you're like, crap, why didn't I do this sooner? You did the best that you could with the resources that you had. This is an impossible situation that we're all in. You know, to the moms and the dads that are dealing with this, that have those moments like, I'm not doing enough for my child. You're doing everything and you're doing a fantastic job on it. And I think that's something we got to remind ourselves about when it comes to anything, when it comes to making any of these decisions for our kids. And remembering there are others out there that have gone through something similar as you. And that's what I love about our support group, is that I sometimes think I'm the only one going through this, and then I'll reach out to a few people and it's like, it saddens and amazes me at the same time at how much support there is and how I'm not alone in the experiences that I've had. We've all had our own unique journeys through all this. So just know that, you know, don't doubt yourself. Don't feel like a failure when, you know, there's something else your kid needs to have in order to have a quality of life. Take it as, you know, this will give them a better quality of life because there's all these resources out there and there's options out there. One thing that I did used to do with G-tubes, anytime we finished with an old one, I would make an emergency kit for when we traveled, in the case that the one that he has gets pulled out or whatever, something happens to it, that I can have as like a backup to just push in until I could get to a hospital. That's one thing that they always told you, you know, with the G-tubes themselves, when they pop out, you have to find something to put in there so that you don't lose that spacing in that hole. So that's something I, like when I would travel with him, I'd always, and I still do, you know, even though he has a GJ tube, but at least if God forbid the whole thing comes out, at least I have something to put in the hole until I could get him to the hospital.
Good advice.
You guys are doing great. And Hillary, thank you for this. Tracy, thank you. It's always fun to talk about our kids and everything that they've accomplished. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Dee. And Tracy, do you have any last words before we wrap up?
Yeah, no, just that I think that, oh, yeah, well, my son's battery on his iPad is gone, so that's the end of the meeting, at least for me. No, I just that the foundation is there, the resources are there, and if they're not there, then we ask. So reach out and you email, you're going to get me. You message the page, you're going to get me. So, or Brandis, mostly me, but so yeah, you know, it's not a just you don't ever have to feel alone in this. There's too many of us out there.
Thank you, Tracy, and I'm so grateful for all of you coming on to share, and we'll reshare all of these resources in the support group, of course. I do want to just make a couple of plugs before we run. First of all, on this topic, we are going to be rolling out a survey pretty soon on feeding tube use and medication formulations. And that's going to be a survey we developed in conjunction with Praxis in order to help them in planning formulation choices for our clinical trial coming up. So that's very exciting. So we're going to ask you guys to help provide feedback so that they can make good decisions for our community. And this is the end of the sponsored series. So thank you guys so much for joining for all of these weeks. We have one more in the series, an unsponsored event next week, again with Praxis Precision Medicines to talk about their program. And thank you again to the guests for showing up today to talk and meaningfully engage and share your knowledge. So grateful. And a thank you to our event sponsors. Again, Praxis Precision Medicines is our lead sponsor, and our other sponsor, Neurocrine Biosciences. Thank you, Casey, for hosting, Megan for the tech support, and as always, thank you, families, for showing up. We can't do this unless you show up and ask questions and are here to learn with us. So this is how we make change happen and get things done and help support each other. So on that note, goodbye, everybody, and we'll see you again next week. Okay, thanks.